Okay, at some point you just have to call it to say, hey, I need to get on with it, and I'm going to use my heritage now. And if I've worked on almost everything a little bit with Conté, then I think that's kind of the indicator. But you also maybe need to get started with the heritage and then revisit. If you have missed something, or the key is the heritage, just like the Conté, is for your cores and your space. So essentially what I'm going to do is just kind of go back and repeat some of my initial steps, and maybe even outline a tiny bit. This is a big thick piece of charcoal. Doesn't take much. Okay? I'm just using it for some of these key darks that what happens is as I develop the Conté, it gets washed out into the overall effect. So I need something else just to pop up my cores, my darks one more time. And same thing, I don't want to overblend, and this time actually a little different. I want to push this charcoal in more force, push it straight down. Don't try to blend it too much. A little blending is going to be fine, but this charcoal just becomes very, very overwhelming and too dominant if you try to blend it. It will take over everything and you'll lose all that early subtlety. But you can see just a little bit. It really pops quick. And that's what we want, is just that little extra hit of black here to kind of make some final corrections or whatever. Pop out some cores and some space tone, get that contrast really, kind of kicking in a couple of key spots. So my advice with the heritage is put it down and just leave it. Okay, don't try to really overblend this stuff. It gets kind of unappealing colors, and it takes over all of the details of other stuff that's happening in your piece. So we want to kind of just use it sparingly. To what we're doing is creating kind of movement with it. If you saw what I did essentially is bring it from one edge of the picture to the other. And as I do that, as I develop it, what I do, I think I'm creating a pathway essentially. And that pathway is a visual pathway that your eye is following. So it's subtle, it's almost subliminal. But we use this final charcoal to control the visual movement in your piece. As much as almost anything else, that's what it's for, is to control the movement of the darks in your drawing. It just helps. You say, hey, I want that dark trail or that dark pathway to pop. And you start to distribute little pieces of this heritage throughout the image and then blend it in or leave some of it fresh. Kind of have to improvise a bit, and you can even use it to create line quality. Okay, still working with this heritage black here, and what I'm doing is just using it to distribute into some of the cores and other places where I want to enhance movement in my dark. I also use it to create dynamics along outlines by pressurizing into the pointed indents and then releasing the pressure as I draw. So go darker in the points and then feather out away from that into the space tone. Just going to use it to sort of go over or touch on some of the cores and line quality of things that are focal point areas in the center of the artwork. Even though this face is light, I can't be too afraid of it. I gotta put a core shadow on there. And I can use this big, thick Heritage charcoal stick to just, it doesn't take much. I just kind of have to lightly swipe at it and tap at it. And, you know, it lets me, what it does is it lets me be a little more loose and lyrical and fluid again. Whereas, you know, some of those other charcoals aren't showing up anymore. You know, because they're not as dark. So I want to kind of, again, cores and space tone, maybe a little bit of line quality. And I do use a little bit of finger blending with this charcoal because it's so soft and malleable. You can just kind of touch it with your fingers and it will smear. So that's another reason not to overblend this one, is it just gets really smudgy, takes over everything. You know, you gotta experiment with these things, but just kind of trust me, you wanna put it down and leave it. Get in the habit of that as an artist, as a creative, is trust some of your initial, you know, moves, your initial marks, and let them kind of speak for themselves in a sense. That's also part of your style and your learning, is to align your mark making and your scribbling, your massing, your hatching with trying to make it represent, turn into something. So here, you know, I think I kind of skipped out. I probably should put a little Conté up here on some of this green first before I add my alpha, or my Heritage. That's Conté. And I want to start to mass in my space tone up here on the top half of this drawing. I'm back to Conté. I'd already kind of switched to some Heritage, but I want to use the Conté here in my space tone up at the top of this page, because I want to make sure that, you know, if I'm following my steps, you know, the Conté needs to go into the cores and into the space tone. So I kind of missed a little bit here. I needed to put some Conté in my space tone. Put the Conté down and swipe in some values. Sometimes you can even just let that Conté swipe right across some of those dark colors. Let the space tone overlap some of the edges of things. The other thing that has to happen is, as I'm blocking in space tone, I often have to tip my charcoal or my Conté upward to the point and redo some outlines as I work. Again, part of what's happening is, you know, the artist is redoing outlines as they go. It's much different than just coloring something in from, you know, a pre-made coloring book or whatever. Okay, you know, you're drawing it. You still have to always be making choices here as you're developing. Alright, so I have Conté now out in my space. I'm just going to glaze that in just a little bit so that I can kind of return. Some of these flowers, I'm leaving them on purpose kind of a little bit unfinished so that they look a little further away maybe, or not as dominant as some of the other stuff in the front. Not as focused. So just things around the edges of your piece, things in the background. I'm just going to kind of suggest that you soften that effect and leave the charcoal more fresh and unblended in the front, where you want there to be more focus and emphasis. So, you know, blending away the sides of the piece, blending away in the background, that's good, but too much blending here it just always goes back to mud and into the middle, and it's very discouraging. So blending isn't necessarily the answer here, you guys, for this stuff in the middle. It's adding your cores, your line quality, your highlights. Got some cores up here. I want to finish some of these little pieces on the eye. This is back to my Conté again. But let's try to wrap this up. Back to this heritage. So I put some of that heritage on some of these cores and in some of these front areas, but there's still a few that I want to, just kind of touch on. I'm just outlining actual flower petals. Sometimes, just a little bit of line. Even from this big thick stick, it seems kind of counterintuitive, but a little bit of outline from this big stick helps to, kind of create the contrast and the strength that's needed to stand up to all those deeper under layers. It's a kind of a trick, I'm barely touching this actually, and I'm getting those darks that are dark as anything I could make from those previous charcoals by pushing as hard as I could. So it's a kind of a scales of pressure, it's like relative. This heritage is just, I barely have to touch the paper to get the effect. You can use it again, you just kind of have to improvise. What can happen, it doesn't have to be blended or super packed down on this final layer. What happens is, with these last two colors, the heritage and the white, is that you don't blend those too much, and then we can use a little bit of fixative at the end to kind of set everything in place. So again, what happens is some of the early layers of the drawing like this are blended deep, glazed down, but your later colors, your later charcoal moves, you don't want to blend everything completely. It gets, it just fades out into nothing. So you've got to find this balance between using your materials and creating the image. It's very challenging, but also very satisfying and enjoyable to be able to have skills to accomplish this kind of thing. Again, you just have to use your kind of intuition. I'm just kind of looking around the piece. I'm scanning it or speed reading it, in a sense, looking for places where I want that darkness or that light to flow better. And it's, flowing to create movement in the piece, to create unity, to create interest and balance, and also to create a kind of sense of accuracy and correctness too. Reflected light underneath of the hat. All right, well, I know there's a lot of stuff I haven't touched on with my alpha, or I keep saying alpha, with my heritage color, my blackest black, but that's okay. What I'm doing is I'm using it to control movement and flow, and some of that is interpretive. As long as I feel like I have done my job of distributing it, and you also have to say, well, hey, did it improve it, or does it need to, what do I need to do to integrate? How can you integrate the new charcoal back down into the piece? But still have it be there as that element doing what it should. For the purposes of the video, I will call the heritage phase almost complete here. And just get on with trying to distribute some final highlights with a white. So the idea here with the white is I got to clean up before I use the white. So you got to clean up before you use the white. And what I'm doing is I'm taking this gray eraser and I'm really swiping off in the white areas. And it's kind of shocking actually, but this gray kneaded eraser really soaks up a lot. Here we go. This is very exciting. So we are at the very end, and I've got some finishing tools that I would use for my highlights, my white. I've got a white Conté, a pencil point eraser, pink pearl eraser here, a gray eraser, a chamois, paper towel or a cotton t-shirt rag, dusting brush, blending sticks. So I've got it all in my hand. But the key is before you go in and you add white, your white charcoal, you need to clean up my gray eraser and use it to sort of swipe over some of the areas that I just want to lift value, make them brighter, okay, or clean off areas that I know I'm going to probably put a little bit of the white. I don't want this gray stuff underneath here to interfere too much with the application of the white. This gray charcoal here shouldn't really be mixing too much with the white charcoal that I'm about to apply. Another thing I'm doing here is just kind of using this gray to smooth out some of the colors on the face and on the bust. And I can also continue to blend with my chamois here into these planes that I just erased. So before you add white, it's just kind of common you would need to do some erasing. And how much you need to do, that's just up to the individual artist. And then, the other thing about erasing is after you erase, you take your chamois and you just kind of tap at it or blend over it. And it helps to soften up those erased values and kind of set them back down into the picture. This is my chamois. I'm just using this to adjust some of these values here. The chamois kind of acts like a blender and eraser, but it takes things to the middle of the value scale. The light middle value part of the value scale as opposed to erasing to white. So we can use these medium colors that come from just blending with the chamois. We can use those colors to fill in some gaps on colors that seem speckly or grainy, but that are in the middle of the value scale. added lifting lights on the top planes, cleaning up with this gray. Looking also, similar to the way we use the heritage. We want to use the white and this final erasing phase to control movement and flow in the final composition. So we're sort of, looking for pathways of visual movement that we can heighten by making some forms lighter or darker, as the case may be. Takes a while to bring all this stuff into focus and to have unity and get the values in the right place. But it's such a satisfying thing to be able to do this kind of stuff when you want to or when you need to. And it's just broadly applicable to so many other kinds of creative work these days on computer and with paint. This is just a towel. Could use a chamois too, but I'm kind of working on the value, the light in the background. We call that backlighting. But it's just light. Backlighting is just light on the background in this case. So the background doesn't all have to be black. Okay, we can have light on a value back there too. That's what sometimes is meant by backlighting, is that the background has light on it. It doesn't necessarily mean that light is coming from behind. It means that aspects of the background have lighting effects on them. That's a little different than maybe what you think of as backlit in photography. So I'm not going to draw that second bust, that second statue back there, but I maybe want to kind of use some of the contrast and some of the light from it to help me create, interest and movement into the piece anyway. So it's kind of like I'm keeping it, but I'm blurring it sort of too. And because it's not really, I have to simplify it. I have to interpret it a little bit. Making creative decisions takes a long time, to get it to kind of all set together. All right, I'm going to call that fine, and let's start to put some highlights on this thing. So typically what you want to do is put highlights on shiny stuff. But there'll be an exception here with the statue because it's so bright and white that we'll probably wind up using some white Conté on the statue as well. But typically speaking, white should be used for things that are shiny or be wet. Those are some of the best uses of the white charcoal. Too much white charcoal tends to lose its effect and can also have kind of an unappealing color difference, and it can really actually flatten out the look of your piece if used incorrectly. So let's use it correctly. Top plane highlights that are getting the most light and that are on shiny objects. Top planes that are shiny. Let's start with that. After we go through top planes that are shiny, what we can start to then do is decide how much of it we should put onto other kinds of objects. So I also want to start kind of from the top down, but since there's nothing bright and shiny up there, I'm going to come down here, which is fine because this is also, I want theirs to be a little more focus here on this bottle. I'll probably need a charcoal pencil as well because I'm going to have to change and shift some of the shapes of these highlights. But there's a highlight here on the edge. It's a reflection from the shadow itself. Sorry, from the statue. Alright, so here's my charcoal pencil. What I'm doing is just kind of cleaning up some of the edges of the reflections or the highlights. And it's a blender. Just kind of every little shape is a little different. Every highlight is a little different at this point because of all this elaborate development that this drawing has gone through. But the idea is, put a little outline around your highlight and then erase it out. And then after you erase it, you can put the white in that little highlight. If you just erase, it might not be sharp enough of a highlight. It might not look like it's supposed to. So you have to come back frequently and redraw some of these colors right around the highlight. Get some of those values right around the highlight again and shape the highlight so that it gets smaller or bigger or longer or rounder or more square, as the case may be, depending on what you're looking at. So the takeaway here is don't just try to erase highlights. You have to actually draw them too with something like a charcoal pencil. And then you often will have to blend them in again into the color around the highlight. Colors around the highlight is a thing. Okay? You have to learn to look for the color around your highlights. White. Okay, start in the bright shiny part of the highlight and then I'm going to use it on things that are facing up or that are shiny. Put a little dot or dash. I missed a couple little places right here. And sometimes too, if you can get the shape or the color you need from just erasing, maybe that's the way to go also. You don't necessarily want to put white on every highlight either. Put it on the brightest highlights first, so that you can create priority or hierarchy. Okay, and then when I'm putting color Conté into the highlight, I'm not just coloring inside the lines, I'm actually kind of coloring in the lines, but also outside the lines too sometimes, to soften that outline that I use to draw the highlight. So using the white and the eraser to blur the effect of the outline of the highlight. But if I don't outline the highlight to begin with, I feel like something is typically missing. Here I have a lot of light on one edge of the bottle, so I'll put a little bit of light there, and then that reflection down into that shadow, or statue making a reflection into the bottle. Okay, I'm going to use the white as like almost space tone here behind this bottle. So now the statue is acting like space tone to that bottle. And so I'm actually going to use some of this white chalk to outline this edge in some key places. And again, I don't want it to mix, so if I have to revise some of my erasing right along those places where those objects are coming together, that would be, expected. That's how you get closer to where you're needing to be, is you have to form things as you work. Okay. A lot of light here on the top of this part of the pedestal. We want to try to clean up before I add the white. Okay, it's not correction fluid. I want the white to be kind of its own thing, and it's got to be fluid, and it's got to, I'm not coloring inside of the lines. That's all I can kind of say. I'm coloring loosely, and sometimes the white is overlapping some of the surrounding colors, and other times it's not filling in those light shapes completely either. It's just kind of hovering inside of the white, or inside of the light shape. Okay, I can put more pressure on it up high on the top of these planes. There's a lot of light on these tops of the shoulder here. I want to use it like on some of those planes that previously I would have maybe left as up facing and with a lot of light on them. You can also use the white Conté here along rim cores, cast shadows. Pear's got kind of a shiny highlight. A lot of little shiny things here on these cameras. Little highlights here on his face. Well, getting closer, getting real close here, almost done to wrap this drawing up. I'm going to pick out a couple lights on the leaf here and then probably just have to call it good. Now I'm sure I could keep going, but for the purposes of our video, I'm going to call this drawing almost done. And what I'm doing is looking for a creative, artistic way to pull the light, the white charcoal through the drawing. So that in the kind of way that the alpha or the heritage charcoal was controlling movement with the darks, the white Conté here is helping you to create a kind of realistic effect, but also to control the movement and flow of the whitest whites and the highlights on your piece. And then just the kind of caveats here, the sort of reservations are, don't let it blend too much into some of these underlying colors. It can have a kind of unappealing bluish effect. So if you can get the effect you need from erasing, then don't put white on everything either, because the more white you use, the less impact it's going to have on some of the most important things. It's not a correcting fluid. What it's for is for light. We'll put that in bright shiny highlight. Typically they're facing up, and avoid blending it into a lot of the surrounding color. If you need something to be lighter, maybe just try using your eraser to get those effects for some of the supporting details and areas in your work. I've got a couple more. I could definitely get some, let's get some white in some of these highlights. Little final note here, let's get some white on some of these highlights in the face, and then I'm going to have to call this done. So I like to start up here somewhere high as kind of a jumping off point. That's literally how I think about it. It's where the light's going to be brightest, and then I'm going to jump off of that and start to piece some of the brightest lights together. And again, I'm not trying to correct anything, I'm just trying to add some light or distribute some of this white onto some of these broad up-facing planes on the forehead and features of the face. A lot of light here on the nasal bone. A lot of light here on the muzzle or the upper lip. A lot of light here on the lower lip, around the mouth, on the top of the chin. Got a lot of light here along this cast shadow edge and into the cheekbone. A lot of light here. Kind of pull those lights back and forth between each other to kind of create more blending effects. And I'll start to let that light blend down just a little bit into the cheek, but I don't want to pull it all the way down because that's not white anymore down here. Okay, so you gotta let those undercolors do what they're supposed to be doing. Don't put white on everything. Only where the brightest highlights are hitting that surface. Now that white's starting to pile up pretty good on some of those top planes. And I want to avoid the temptation to be putting it on everything. I see it, I put it on this flower over here, and I don't really like it. It's got a color difference that I don't like. So if I notice something is changing color that I don't like, try erasing it. Just get rid of it. Erase it off. Maybe you're going to get the color you need from erasing instead of your white. So that's other possibility when you're using the white, is you shouldn't have done it. You should have used something else. And this is back to my 6B. I just keep using that to redo some of the line quality, some of these final details here. I almost need like a pencil or a, kind of a lyrical little quick sharp line to define some of these small details here at the end. So too much white, definitely going to create a lot of problems. Don't overdo it. Same thing with that heritage. These last two colors can't state enough that it's those are kind of like some finishing things that you should really only do after a lot of the hard work is finished. Because if you overdo those last two things, and you can overdo them really quick. After investing all this time in a long-term piece like this, if you overdo some of these final colors, it can really kind of soften kill some of the effect. So takeaway here is, if you do happen to get too much of one of those final colors on there, just use one of your gray erasers to soak it up and reapply it as needed. But it's okay if you have to get rid of some of it and redraw some things. That's just going to be part of the learning curve. And back to my heritage here again. A couple more final details on some of these cores on this leaf. And guys, I gotta go. Man, it's been a good semester. And I really, really appreciate everybody sticking with it. and hopefully this kind of slow process, long-term video is kind of what you need to pull it all together here at the end. And get your bearings for your final projects. Still adding dark to some of these planes, and just gotta use your intuition. Looking for movement, balance, accuracy, completion, unity, as we say. Looking for unity. Let's go ahead and sign this drawing. I'm going to sign it down here lower right. I don't want to sign too far off the edge of the page. The signature's got to be somewhere down here near the corner, but inside of the frame, and you don't want to maybe go too far to the edge, because if you wanted to put a frame on this or something, that might cover up your signature. So push it in just a little bit, but put it down here so we know which way is up and who you are. This is a Conté crayon, and I'm just going to sign this in a kind of small or legible print, the way that I would sign, something like a bank credit card or other thing, where I want the person to know it's me, but still have a little bit of personality to it. So I want my signature to be legible, because I want to show people who made the art, but I also want to show that I'm proud enough of it that I can declare it as mine. Okay, brush that off. I can take a little paper towel, kind of dust that in. What I'm not really trying to smear it, but push it in really. And I always have to maybe take my eraser, kind of tap at it if there's a little stuff that moved around or something. So what I'm doing really is trying to set my signature down into the artwork, so that it becomes a little more integrated as part of the piece. Gotta be legible, but it shouldn't be the first thing people see either. So I want it to be integrated and have a kind of balance in there with the rest of what's happening. And then, I often do this once I sign something. I did that in Conté. I'll just take that crayon and maybe use it to tighten up or add a little bit more. Again, the idea is creating movement here, and the materials themselves create a kind of dialogue. you know, where if you have passages of alpha, passages of heritage, passages of Conté, passages of 6B, those things resonate. So got my signature here, and maybe I just, you know, I'm just trying to bring a little more of that color up and into the piece just a little bit more, looking for a tiny bit more unity, but then just, I think we should call this good because I need to go.